Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV. HFO-TV is co-sponsored by the construction, repair, and restoration firm J.R. Johnson, the real estate law firm Baljanik LLP, the tax deferral accommodator Butler Exchange Group, the mortgage banking firm Gantry Incorporated, and forensic building consultants providing building structural science services.
Welcome back to HFO TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we're going to have part two with Brett Waller, Director of Government Affairs with the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. We're going to talk about some specific bills. So Brett, thank you for coming back again. Because for people that don't understand, there's a lot of bills that get thrown out. There's, if you followed all of them, I think, thousands, but how many actually go to that next step that we're in the process of getting, looked at, negotiated, and all that?
Exactly. Yeah. So, a lot of times in normal years, legislators will just throw policies out, and it really is an opportunity to create a conversation or add to a conversation. In this COVID year, there are much fewer bills that have been introduced. I think around maybe less than 1,000 bills total were introduced.
Wow. Okay.
And it really narrowed kind of the scope and really focused in on some of the priorities and the needs of the state. Certainly, there were some restrictions on lawmakers to be able to introduce bills. They had to be COVID focused. And have some sort of a recovery component to them in order, and really they will continue to, in order for there to be continuing consideration. But top of mind of us is COVID recovery, and how do we walk our way out of this pandemic? How do we walk our way out of the eviction moratorium? And what does that look like? We know we can't have a cliff. The moratorium can't end with a cliff. We're not reopening businesses in a cliff type of a scenario. There's a phased approach, and we know that we need something similar as we move forward into the legislature. We also know that the most successful mechanism to recover from this pandemic is going to be rental assistance. We can't have tenants who have rental debt that's owing, that's just chasing them around for 5-10 years into the future. And we know that we also need a huge amount of new housing. And when you constrict the ability of owners to take proceeds from their current rentals and invest that in new housing and provide new housing opportunities, then that cuts off one of the main supply lines for creating new housing within the state.
And you're hearing that. I mean, you do hear about equity. If equity has a choice of where they're going to invest, again, a lot of it's, they think of the Class A, but that trickles down. I mean, if you've got policies in place that are going to make it tough and restrictive, that's not going to spur new housing development, which again, makes more stuff naturally affordable and things like that. So I think it's really trying to get people to understand that that will come all the way through. And we try to let them know, as from a legislator standpoint, is when they talk about housing providers, there's this assumption that it's this big mega corporation that's just rolling, and that is some of it, but that's not the majority of people involved in the housing industry that are providing housing. And they can't continue to carry this burden and basically an interest-free loan, and then again, it doesn't benefit the tenant to have this balance hanging over their shoulder down the road. So what is the relief for COVID, and how do we get out of this step here? So trying to find creative solutions that address that tenant need, but then also don't just put the burden on certain segments of the population.
Definitely, yeah. It's incumbent upon the state for the recovery of the entire state from an economic perspective to make sure that people are secure in their home and are able to pay their rent. That's generally the most expensive cost that anyone has, rent or mortgage. And if they can't pay that, then they very likely are not out in the economy, the general economy, buying other goods and services to support just a broad economic recovery.
So now I know in Washington, the eviction process, the governor put some things in, maybe to shine a little light on that, because like I said, we've got clients that own them both and have talked about, it sounds like, one minute it's, Oregon's crazy, and then Washington back and forth. So, kind of what's going on in regards to the added eviction protections for tenants?
So effectively, evictions are prohibited in the state of Washington, and they have been since April 16th of 2020. It's made it very difficult to fully manage residential communities in the state because housing providers, property managers are just unable to address very common nuisances that occur within the property that don't rise to criminal activity or need the threat of, not the threat of, but need the response of police.
So there's no exception for just for causes? Or is it such a narrow scope that it's tough to?
The scope is so narrow that it makes it very difficult. Just to give you an example, there's about 29,000 evictions in the state of Washington in 2019. There were less than 2,000 evictions total in the entire state of Washington in 2020. Wow. And that's not to say that eviction is a good thing, but the reality is that eviction is a tool and a mechanism to make sure that properties remain safe and that owners are maintaining those properties in the manner they should be, and that's with the consent and the compliance of tenants. When you have handcuffed property managers to be unable to address common noise and other material breaches of the rental agreement, it makes it very difficult, especially for even to satisfy good tenants and make sure that they want to stay. One bad experience from a bad neighbor is just it's like the moving truck has arrived for them to leave and go find another community to live in. And you really want to keep your good residents, your good tenants, because that's the fabric, that's the core of a community. It's what makes a community great.
So did the governor extend that out? Is it now beyond? Is there an expiration date? Is it tied to the emergency? So
we're hearing that the governor really wants to end the moratorium. He does not want to continue extending the moratorium. I think there are a couple complicating things here, though. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. We're in phase 2 of a recovery, which means you can eat inside again at 25%, but that's not necessarily sufficient for restaurants to have a full staff of people. And there's still a ton of people who are very concerned about going out in public and eating inside, and just because there's so much that's unknown about the COVID disease itself. I think the other kind of concerning issue that I have is, you have this CDC moratorium that expires on March 31st as well. And President Biden has previously indicated that he had some interest in extending it.
Yes.
We saw this week that he extended foreclosure protections. And I would expect to see him also extend the eviction moratorium at least to June 30th at this time. That seems to be kind of a good place, not necessarily a good place, but a place where we're seeing other things to be extended as well.
Now in Washington, was the tenant required to fill out an affidavit showing need?
No, so the moratorium doesn't provide any requirements on the tenant to really do anything. Right. The onus on the eviction moratorium is strictly on the landlord's shoulders. And for much of the past 11 months, the landlord has really been even prohibited from communicating with the tenant without the threat of some litigation or cease and desist from the state. And that's made it really difficult to even try and engage and have really basic conversations about, hey, you owe this rent. We understand that you might be having some difficulty, but you do still have an obligation to pay that rent. Let's see how we can work out a payment plan or find you some rental assistance. It's
funny, we were getting asked by some legislatures in both states about trying to get some information about, who really needed help. And we kind of in the way you put this in place, we can't ask that information anyway. And so, it's kind of, not having some type of means testing for the tenant. Again, as I try to explain to somebody, when you've got people, and I'm not saying, you got some people taking advantage of it, which then, does not enable the owner to help people that really need help. So, if we're all going to try to work at this together, we need to do this all together. But it's been interesting to hear some of the feedback as to, why they don't want to do that or why they're not going to do that. It's just, like I said, it's put a lot of burden on the property management and the ownership side.
I'm sympathetic to renters who have lost their job and are experiencing, pretty extreme hardship right now, where the uncertainty about whether or not unemployment insurance is going to be extended and additional benefits are going to be provided to be able to pay those basic expenses. But at the same time, we have to be able to engage in moderate communication and provide some just opportunities to communicate back and forth. Without that ability to communicate, you can't even begin the conversation of understanding why someone is or is not able to pay their rent.
And are you feeling that in Olympia that message is getting through, or is it still, is it still kind of coming on deaf ears? I mean, I think that's been the issue, I think, with a lot of owners and management companies is, you want to have stakeholders to the table that deal with this on a daily basis on how to address this concern. And, we kind of give you, what the issues may be or what the concerns are, and it just doesn't seem to, either it doesn't get listened to, or, I mean, are you feeling a change a little bit at all, or is it still kind of where we were 6 months, a year ago?
Admittedly, I feel like I talked about this issue about communication and ghosting, as some call it. It's kind of been termed elective non-payer in the state of Washington until I was about blue in the face. And the federal rental assistance bill that was introduced in the legislature and just passed, just delivered to the governor, includes $2 million for 1 to 4 unit properties in situations where that property owner has an elective non-payer. And they specifically used elective non-payer verbiage. A part of me is upset about that because I'm like, this is a communication issue. It's not necessarily, we in a lot of cases, we can't prove that someone is intentionally refusing to pay their rent. We can assume based upon things that we're seeing and they're doing, where we believe we see them leave every day, or they're getting a bunch of packages delivered to the community, including home loan documents and those kinds of things. But at the same time, we have no, physical evidence to prove that they are intentionally refusing to pay their rent. And now they've kind of coined this term in law about elective non-payer as it exists. And so it's really interesting that we went blue in the face talking about it, and it finally stuck somehow, but it's taken 9 months in order to get to where we are.
And so in the legislative session now, we'll talk a little bit about that. In terms of, are there bills that are, maybe looking at some of the plight that, operators and providers are having to deal with? Or are you, there's some on here that or is it the flip side where we still have got some bills in there that, clearly, are going to be more of a burden, more of a cost, and at the end of the road, these unintended consequences are, it's going to be less housing, things are going to be more affordable. I mean, are there some in particular that you're looking at that you want to talk about?
I don't think there's any one silver bullet that's going to create a recovery, a path to recovery for from the pandemic. We have a couple high priority bills. One of them is Substitute Senate Bill 5160. This is particularly a COVID related bill, and is it's very tenant friendly right now as it's currently drafted. We're opposed to it. It effectively makes permanent the eviction moratorium for 2 years after the end of the public health emergency. Provides a right to counsel, and does away with quite a few other negotiated issues that we've negotiated over the past prior years.
Now, is the governor behind that one?
I don't know specifically what his position is on the bill. They have 4 priorities. They want to see rental assistance. They want to see some tenant protections. They want to see codification of the eviction resolution pilot program, which we can talk about. And there's one more. I can't remember what the 4th priority is. But that's what they're looking at when they're looking at these different bills that are being proposed around COVID and landlord tenant issues. The other is just cause eviction, and that's a bill that we've defeated over the past few years. It's back again. It's receiving some additional scrutiny, I think, because there's a real focus that on maintaining housing stability and making sure that if a landlord's going to receive income from the state, whether that's rental assistance or some other sort of financial assistance, that they shouldn't be able to receive that assistance and then terminate that tenancy with no real what they would say justifiable reason. And so that's kind of that. Those are the 2 big bills that we're following and seeing right now.
So in Senate Bill 5160, the one with where they're going to extend it out for 2 years, that's I think when that one got dropped is the one where we had, owners who own in both states are all around like, you guys think it's great, you think it's bad here. Did you just see what Washington's trying to get through with extending out this eviction moratorium? So, I mean, so that one's still in play. you know, is it timing in the next couple months? I mean, what's the speed in terms of the Washington legislature to kind of get these things up for debate?
So it appears to be the vehicle, though it's got some hurdles. I would say that as it's currently written, there is not, it may not have the votes to move forward. It's currently in the Ways and Means Committee because the bill does have a fiscal impact on the state. The state would be required to fund right to counsel for indigent tenants. It would be required to fund the landlord, or not the landlord, it would be, the landlord mitigation fund. It creates an additional access point for the landlord mitigation fund, and it would be required to fully fund this eviction resolution pilot program. So it's sitting in Ways and Means right now. It has to move out of Ways and Means by Monday, the 22nd. If it doesn't move by then, it's considered dead, and we'll have to figure out a different mechanism, a different opportunity, or a different vehicle in order to address COVID recovery. They're really the only thing of agreement right now is that there has to be a bill addressing COVID relief and COVID recovery in the landlord-tenant relationship. How that works and how that operates, it remains to be seen.
And we've tried to, you know, project that, you know, if the one bill fits all may not be the best solution. I mean, it's grateful that we're getting some of the money out from the federal and the state. It's out, but you know, does that addressing it all? And you know, our fear is on some of these deals. You say, hey, that's a great idea, we support it, but that can't be the only solution, because again, if they're prioritizing small owners, or you know, in trying to get them to understand this is a big, you know, much bigger problem than that, and we've got to look at various solutions for, you know, various, you know, different situations. That's been a big, I think, I don't want to say education, but kind of enlightening. It seems like, again, you've been doing this, you know, a long time and trying to educate down in Olympia and get legislators to kind of look at the pain. So one thing we've asked a lot of our clients and owners is don't just lean on, you know, your management company to do, you know, to kind of make that fight. You need to be vocal. You need to get involved. It's now a time where I think all these organizations, you know, it's a much more politically driven and stakes are much higher. But again, if owners need to, you know, get involved in this stuff and, you know, getting down, talking in front of their elected officials, going to Olympia if need be. Because again, I think when the same voices say it again and again, they don't really put a face with, you know, some of that pain. You know, there's somebody behind there that's having a hard time making their mortgage payment, or, you know, doing whatever, you know, doing improvements to the property. And we've implored a lot of our owners to get more involved. You know, if it's through the management company, fine, but get more involved in these organizations, because they really need to hear your voices.
Yeah, it's really important that owners be aware of what's happening in the legislature. Laws are made because constituents go to lawmakers and say, I want a law. And the power of the people is in the vote. And it's really important that lawmakers, one, hear the voice of the people who they represent. And that's important on a number of levels and in a number of ways, because every person has a story, and that story needs to be told. I can't necessarily tell the story of every owner, because every owner is different and the housing market is very diverse. But if we don't tell those stories and the impact, and you quietly get frustrated as an owner and just leave, that doesn't help the broader market. The other thing is that it's just really important to be knowledgeable about the mechanism and the ways in which the legislature works, and how you can, as an individual owner, really try and affect change. It may not be that just speaking or telling your story in the legislature is going to be successful, but voting and talking about how a particular lawmaker, the lawmaker that represents you, has affected you and your business with your neighbors, may start a movement, community movement, to find someone else who might want to run for office and run for a House seat, or become a senator. And really make change that way. We need business people to consider running for state elected office and even local community councils, because we need that voice. The housing providers especially need that voice in a time when the landlord-tenant relationship is under the spotlight. Yeah. And the landlord is villainized for every move they make.
Brad, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us again. It was very enlightening. Again, as we both said, people need to get involved. I'm sure we'll have you back again as we kind of get updates as this political process goes in both states, and we'll see what happens. So again, thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.